Hi, this is the Sunday sermon for St Christopher's Church in Leicester for Sunday the 25th of April 2021. Our Bible passages for today are John chapter 10 verses 11 to 18 and 1 John chapter 3 verses 16 to 24, although we will be preaching from the John's Gospel passage, the first of those that I've mentioned. Both of those passages should be accessible via links beneath this video, so if you've not yet read them, please pause this video, read them, and then when you're ready, press play. Jesus as the Good Shepherd is one of those images from the Bible which might make us smile. Who knows how many Sunday school sheets have been printed out with pictures of Jesus carrying sheep on his shoulders or lovingly guiding or protecting his flock. It's a beautiful image which can reassure us. Jesus is everything he says he is, and as part of that, he is the Good Shepherd. But perhaps when we think of Jesus' teachings, sometimes we recall different stories in slightly different ways, or different passages in slightly different ways. For instance, when we think of a parable, we perhaps don't just think of an individual image paused in time, a bit like an image in a stained glass window, for instance. Because parables are stories, and therefore they have beginnings, middles, and endings. And we probably, therefore, don't just think of a single snapshot from them. But when it comes to Jesus' teaching on his being the Good Shepherd, I wonder if actually many of us do sometimes only think of it as a nice, comforting snapshot. Because when I look at the detail of this passage today, there are things in there which maybe you wouldn't automatically bring to mind when you think of Jesus being the Good Shepherd. A wolf potentially attacking, an employee abandoning the flock, sheep scattering, and a shepherd laying down his life. There is so much in this passage and so much that it can teach us. We have so much to cherish here regarding the nature of our salvation. And so as we look at this passage together in John's Gospel, I'm going to do so using three simple headings. Firstly, saved from. Secondly, saved by. And thirdly, saved to. So firstly, saved from. Through Jesus, we are saved from certain death. Indeed, we are saved from a fate worse than death. I want you to notice in this passage that Christians are here represented as sheep. Just ponder that for a moment. A sheep is a vulnerable and almost powerless animal. A wolf, on the other hand, which is mentioned in verse 12, is a predator. So when a sheep and a wolf face each other, you know what the outcome is going to be. The wolf will kill the sheep. You could run that same scenario 1,000 times over and the wolf would always kill the sheep. It would never be the other way round. The sheep is vulnerable and powerless. And when it comes to our salvation, we are powerless. We cannot save ourselves no matter what we do. If we had 1,000 lifetimes to try and earn our salvation through trying to be good, we couldn't do it. We could never escape sin, death, and hell. Therefore, if we are to be saved, someone else must do it for us. Someone else must save us. And so we move on now to saved by. We are saved by someone who will give his all to save us. Now you'll notice one of the people Jesus mentions in this teaching is the so-called hired hand in verse 12. This is someone who's been given a job to look after the sheep. But this hired hand is not really bothered about the sheep. They're only really bothered about getting their wages at the end of a shift. They're only really there because of what's in it for them. When the wolf attacks the flock, the hired hand runs away because, verse 12, he is a hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep. Perhaps you've had relationships which have felt a bit like that. Perhaps relationships with friends or family members or colleagues or whatever, and you've sensed that the relationship you have with them only really exists because the other person wants to get something out of you. They want something from you that you can provide them with. Maybe you've got a really good sense of humour, and so long as you're making this person laugh, they like having you round. They want to be involved in your life. But then, when you hit a difficult period and you're no longer able to be fun all the time, they drop you like a stone. Or perhaps someone has recognised that you're a caring person who will help others, and they've entered into a relationship with you because they need the help that you provide. Now, of course, as Christians, we should be willing to help others, whether the relationship is lopsided or not. But maybe in the past, you've ended up feeling really hurt by someone doing this because you realised that they didn't value at all for who you are. Instead, they only valued you because of what they could get from you. And going a bit further, one of the issues we might face when we think about God is to think that God views us in the same way. God is only interested in us because of what he can get out of us. He's not really interested in us for who we are. And so, if we're ever tempted to think like that, we've ended up projecting onto God ideas about him that come from actually our earthly relationships. We might have had such experience of so-called hired hands in our life. And indeed, we may recognise that we ourselves have been guilty of being hired hands to others at times as well. And maybe our experience of those relationships has leaked into how we've thought about our relationship with God. But notice this, and notice it clearly. The hired hand and the good shepherd are totally different characters here in Jesus' teaching. They are not the same at all. The hired hand is only really in it for himself. But the good shepherd, he is indeed good. He genuinely loves and cares for the sheep. He's not just interested in them for what he can get out of them. He's interested in the sheep because he genuinely loves them and wants their well-being. And he feels that so strongly that he will even die to protect them from the wolf. We cannot save ourselves at all. And so we need someone who will give everything to do it for us, to get that job done. And that is what Jesus Christ does. He is the one who went to the cross for us. As Jesus says in verse 14, I lay down my life for the sheep. Through dying, he defeated the enemies which were ready to tear us apart: sin, death, and hell. He went to the cross for me, and he went for you, because you are of such value to him. Not simply what he can get from you, but you yourself. Finally, saved to. What are we saved to? Well, we are saved to a place of safety, of course, having been rescued by our Good Shepherd. But notice how we see here that we are saved to relationship. That is, to make it a bit more clear, our salvation brings us into relationship. It brings us into relationship with God, and it also brings us into relationship with one another. Notice here that our relationship with God is depicted as well in a really personal way. Jesus says in verse 14, I know my sheep and my sheep know me, just as the Father knows me and I know the Father. So something of the relationship Jesus has with his Father from all eternity, that loving, mutual relationship within God the Trinity, something of that is experienced in the relationship we have with Jesus. He knows us intimately and he loves us intimately. But notice also that our experience of being saved is, in a way, also with one another as well. In verse 16, Jesus says this, I have other sheep that are not of this sheep pen. I must bring them also. They too will listen to my voice, and there shall be one flock and one shepherd, or there will be one flock and one shepherd. So what does this mean? Well, it seems best to understand that when Jesus speaks of the sheep in the sheep pen in verse 16, he's referring to members of the Jewish people who believed in him or who would believe in him. That is, God's chosen people in the Old Testament, the nation of Israel, those Jews who would put their trust in him. But he says that his sheep are not limited to Jewish Christians. There are also sheep that are his that are not of that sheep pen. There are others out in the world who he must gather also. And my guess is that for most of us, if not all of us watching today, this video, that means and includes me and you. And so, Jesus is gathering Cambodian Christians and Kenyan Christians and Peruvian Christians and Polish Christians and Jamaican Christians and Japanese Christians. He's gathering them all into his flock, along with Jewish Christians, making one flock out of them all. Whoever we are, wherever we're from, when we put our trust in Jesus Christ, we become his. We come under his protection, rescued and safe as part of his one flock. Now, we might know that, at least with our heads. But I think it's important to stress that once more today. On Thursday, it was Stephen Lawrence Day. Also this week, we've had the verdict in the George Floyd trial over in the US. These are reminders that our world is marred with tension and prejudice and injustice and hatred, and that divides and disfigures the human race. But if we hear Jesus Christ's call to put our trust in him, to come into his flock, then we join his renewed human race, the one people of God. As Jesus makes clear in verse 16, there is one flock with one shepherd. And out of that, it's important that we recognise from this passage where our unity and equality as followers of Christ, from wherever we have come from, where that unity and equality comes from. Because here, when Jesus teaches this truth, he is not drawing on secular ideas about our status and our identity. Instead, we see that for all of these sheep, drawn from all over the world, from the peoples of the world, what gives them the same identity, status and equality is that we are in the care of the same good shepherd, Jesus Christ, and sharing the same relationship with him. The people of God, in all their beauty, in their diversity, and in their richness are gathered together, one with another, as they gather around their same good shepherd. And we as the church must hold on to that always. So rejoice. The salvation that our Good Shepherd brings to us is total. We were powerless, but his salvation is total and complete. And give thanks to God and pray for the power of the Holy Spirit to be at work in us to share this wonderful news of our Good Shepherd and live lovingly and self-sacrificially for God and for those around us, just as our Saviour Jesus Christ did.